There was a huge upset in Virginia over the race to become governor. The Republican Glenn Youngkin won a surprise victory in a state, essentially, that Joe Biden won comfortably only a year ago in the presidential election. He won by 10 points. And the main focus of Youngkin's campaign was education, which is an unusual thing to focus on in any kind of political race, really. It's not normally a big, hot election topic. But Tom, do you want to explain why education was so central to this?
So it's become the first kind of electoral test, albeit a kind of statewide electoral test of this battle that's been going on between this kind of nascent parents movement and various school boards. And the issue is basically the way in which kind of woke politics has started to kind of permeate school practice. It's kind of combination of things. So a lot of these places, the lockdowns meant that kids were at school for, most of the past year in some cases. And so you have this situation where school is brought home and a lot of parents were seeing the kinds of materials that their kids were having put in front of them and seeing some of these kind of Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo type tropes make their way in to the curriculum, and not in a way it seems like that was just about discussing these ideas amongst others, but this, this being something akin to sort of indoctrinating kids into all of these ideas around America being white supremacist, or around the general kind of what, as a catch-all term, kind of gets referred to as critical race theory, but it's probably even more sort of degraded and certainly a lot more widespread than that particular quite niche legal academic pursuit. And also, particularly in Virginia, there's been this new discussion around kind of gender-neutral bathrooms, which has stirred up, and we've talked about in Spikes in the past week. So you had Glenn Youngkin very effectively make that a kind of core part of his campaign, and then Terry McAuliffe completely shoot himself in the foot, first of all, by saying that this issue of critical race theory in schools was basically a right-wing conspiracy theory and a racist dog whistle, I think in his particular terms. There was this quote which really did the rounds in one of the debates where he basically suggested that parents basically dictating what should be taught in school is something that he doesn't want to see. It was actually in the context of something a little bit different, but nevertheless it came to define that kind of core difference between him and Youngkin, I guess. And also the media, it's been fascinating because they have just completely done basically two things at the same time. On the one hand, has just admonished these parents and suggested that they basically are either just racist or they're just gripped by a conspiracy theory that doesn't actually exist. And then this other thing, which is to say that, critical race theory just isn't the thing. This is a complete myth. This is completely made up. Again, McAuliffe made this point despite the fact when he was last governor in Virginia, his own Department of Education instructed schools to quote unquote embrace critical race theory. This is something that Christopher Rufo found out in the course of the recent weeks of campaigning. And so what you see here is something that I think we're going to see more and more, is that wokeness just cannot survive democracy. As soon as you have an opportunity in which the issues are live and in which the election is really polarized those subjects, you see a genuine pushback. As you say, Joe Biden won this state comfortably. Now it's gone to a Republican, I think, for the first time in about 12 years. Yeah. So it's really, really significant. And what's amazing is that not unlike the meltdown after Trump's election or various other elections that haven't gone the kind of Democratic establishment's way in recent years, you just have outright denial that this is a problem, smearing it all as just racism, despite the fact that you see in reports that there's many Black and Hispanic parents who are really concerned about this as well. So it just shows that the Democrats have a real problem where this kind of thing is concerned, because not only are they not on the side of a lot of ordinary people on these questions, but as soon as they receive that admonishment from the voters, again, the reflex is to say, you're wrong and you're probably racist. Yeah. And that playbook hasn't worked very well for them in recent years.
I like your point, Tom, about wokeness not surviving contact with democracy. And in some ways, you get a sense that the people pushing many of these woke ideas kind of know that. I mean, a lot of this is done in a way that is designed to bypass parents quite clearly, pushing these ideas through schools rather than having a kind of open debate about them. But also the evasion. Whenever parents complain about this, the evasion itself shows that they're not prepared to defend the ideas around that have been called critical race theory in public. They simply say, no, we're not teaching that. Or either that, or, oh no, we're just teaching about racism or about race and about racism in history or something like that. So there is a kind of, there is almost, knowingly or not, there is a sense in which wokeness the advocates of it sort of know they can't really get away with it, or they know they're not on the side of the majority.
Yeah, or as you said in your column this week, Fraser, they're kind of playing this double game, which is there was this brilliant write-up in a brilliantly terrible write-up in a Guardian US article where he was basically framing Youngkin's win as the weaponizing of an anti-CRT sentiment, and the article talked about the fact that this was really just a backlash to the Black Lives Matters protests, as if like you said, it was a really specific campaign about education and about teaching kids. This wasn't just like a nebulous feeling, a sentiment that he picked up on in general society. It was a very specific and targeted area of policy and area of politics in relation to what happens with kids in schools. And the article went on to talk about the fact that this was really just about, a backlash to more minorities being visible in America.
Yeah.
And that's on the one, like you say in your article, on the one hand, they say critical race theory is really specific. It's not being taught everywhere. It's a theory. And then on the other hand, the article said, well, they're lumping things like anti-bias training in with this. It's like, that is critical race theory.
Yeah.
That's if you're talking to kids about race, that's great. That's fine. People have been doing that for years, actually, and schools have been pretty good about that. That's why we don't ban Harper Lee or To Kill a Mockingbird. It's why we teach Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain, because we've talked to kids about the issues of race. That's very different from saying, and what Youngkin picked up on, that there are areas of education which are no-go zones.
Yeah.
So you cannot deny your white privilege, or you cannot question whether or not there's a difference between you and your black friend and your white friend. But the thing is, this isn't just actually about education, because really what this whole discussion, and that, Republicans can get a bit silly and can do the whole kind of like they're indoctrinating our kids thing. But the thing about this particular issue of critical race theory is that it does seem like a very obvious, if not indoctrination, willful kind of blinkering of kids to wider discussions about politics. And you see it play out outside of the classroom, in universities, and then now in workplaces where you have all of this training being brought in, and it gets people's backs up, because basically what it's saying is, if you don't buy into our position, you are a bigot and a racist. And so then that's not a backlash. That's a very normal position to have in a world that is a lot of the time seeming like it's going mad.
And it's interesting to hear Youngkin defending his campaign against critical race theory using the Martin Luther King line, essentially, which would be our defense, which would be how we would argue against it as well, that we don't want to see the world through race.
Yeah.
But now if you refuse to see the world through race, then you're seen as part of the problem.